Right, great. So our journey into agriculture began with a desire to grow healthy vegetables that we ourselves would want to eat using organic farming principles. So we chatted last week about how we had a couple of years of backyard gardens, studied how to grow more vegetables than ever thought possible. So we got into farming right away using what I call square foot gardening on a commercial scale. And square foot gardening is very intensive. So if you think about square foot gardening, we would pack as much vegetables into one. Well, I guess I should say it the opposite way. We would use a tenth the land mass that it would normally be used in a commercial vegetable farm in rows and stuff. So square foot gardening really intensifies the growing area, which that also comes with problems because now you're taking a lot more from the soil. So if one doesn't put back into the soil, then you see it exponentially gets harder and harder, or you see more problems faster. Fixing a problem can take a little bit longer too. So just in that aspect. Our understanding of soil and its relationship to growing vegetables was very limited. You know, we knew we had read books and studied as like, oh, certain plants like calcium or more calcium, more of this, more different aspects of it, but it's kind of an old school way of thinking. And so if one is caught up in that thinking, it's hard to kind of go to a new way of thinking if it's all broken down into individual minerals and aspects that way. So we hadn't heard of regenerative agriculture or no-till farming at that time. I knew a little bit about no-till farming, but I knew no-till farming from big commercial grain growers. And it's no-till, but that was a misnomer. Basically, big grain farmers would use no-till farming to save a pass on plowing the field in the springtime. So they called it no-till, but it was kind of a way to save 50% on fuel, because normally they would plow the field and then they would do no-till. They would plow the field, then they would seed. And then when they did it all in one pass, they called it no-till. So that was my understanding of no-till at that time, which is far from what no-till actually means. As our farm grew, we developed an intensive farming operation, planted as early as the beginning of March and harvesting into late November, with 3 or more crops in most beds throughout the season. Our crop rotations, some of the beds would be rotated, I think, up to 12 times. So those would be microgreens, peas, sunflower shoots. Our salad green beds would be rotated on a 4-week basis. So we would plant out in March, and the last planting would go in when was that? Latter part of September. So every week or every 4 weeks, those beds would be planted out. So it must be like 8 times that we use those ones out. So very intensive. We began farming with Elliot Coleman's approach to agriculture, which involved incorporating compost into the bed. So his approach kind of is, don't quote me on this. I'm not trying to put, we used his reference point because at that time he had written a couple market garden books, and I mean, he is a very good farmer. And so what we understood what he meant was to incorporate we used 4 pails of compost per 50 foot long bed, and we used 30-inch wide beds. Sorry, we talked about all that in the last one, so I guess I should reiterate that. Our farm ended up being 320 beds, 50 feet long by 30 inches wide. That was our farm setup. And so each of those beds, when we started following Elliot Coleman's process, was to incorporate 4 or 5 gallon pails per one bed, but then tilling it into the bed, which you will see later on that that is the wrong thing to do. It's great to add compost, but tilling it in is actually more damage. It's not more damage, but you get more bang for buck by not tilling it in. So we used BCS tractors at the beginning of every season. Our first couple of years, we were rototilled the entire field. And it was interesting because every spring I would look at the soil, and the soil would be this beautiful brownie type material. And I'd always be amazed at how beautiful it was, but because tilling, you had to go in there, prep those beds, and then we'd till it and it'd be powdered. And then every planting we do after that would get progressively worse and worse. And so I still remember those first couple of years, early on in the spring, having beautiful soil at the very start, and then progressively it got worse, more powdery, more sandy, that sort of stuff. So the land. Our knowledge of the history of the 2-acre plot of land that we farmed was that it was the traditional floodplains in Kelowna. It had been a tobacco farm at one point in time. I believe it was a pig farm as well. And then latter years, it was a strawberry farm that was conventional, lots of spraying. And I knew the person that had farmed it. He had problems with wireworm coming in and eating off the crown of the strawberries. That's why he quit using that field, because he had so many problems with the strawberries being eaten. The crown would be eaten apart and then everything would die. So that's why he gave it up. So we entered this field with a lot of wireworm being in the field, not knowing anything about wireworm, and then, starting to see how they would affect us later on. Our soil type was, because we were in a floodplain, if you can see the picture in here, to the top right corner there's a creek actually right there. The Mission Creek in Kelowna, it's actually a river, I think, because it flows pretty hard in the springtime. In the springtime, it can flow 4 feet to 5 feet above the level of the soil. So that used to be one big floodplain. So our soil type was in equal parts sand, silt, and clay, which is, ideal soil. It can be problematic as far as it's great for through and for kind of organic matter settling out. A good friend of mine told me once that in sand, silt, and clay, equal parts, the discs of clay, because clay is basically little tiny discs that how they compact is they start laying on top of each other. And with that much sand, silt, and clay, the clay starts to flock out and causes a top layer of crustation. And that we definitely noticed that our first couple of years, especially when we didn't have as much organic matter in the soil, as we would crust up very fast, even though the soil seemed to be unpackable in a sense. So our irrigation source was Mission Creek, which was next door. And then our pest pressures were flea beetle, which we combated with insect netting. We never ever sprayed with for flea beetle. Aphids on kale was a problem, and other brassicas, but kale was the big one because we did grow kale in the summertime, and we had the biggest pressure in the summertime. And then powdery mildew, which is kind of a normal thing. I think most people have problems with. Some years we had it worse than others, and those were the years that we did not have them in as nice of a soil as we had before, in other years. So we definitely seen powdery mildew zucchini is more susceptible to powdery mildew based on if the soil was nicely, how do you call it? It was just nice condition, I guess.
And a bit in our greenhouses when we didn't have proper airflow ventilation.
Yeah, we tried a couple times where we grew zucchini inside in a cold frame, and when the heat came out, it just caused problems. So Okay, soil management. So yeah, the first year when we took over the land, the landowner, he's a landscaper, and so all their grasses and trimmings coming from their job sites would be put onto a big pile, and then they would make a pile. It wouldn't be called a compost pile. It's somewhat of a rotten pile, you could call it, like a lot of piles of debris are, because it wasn't necessarily turned that well. It was stinky when it would be flipped. So he gave us that a pile, and I'm guessing that we put on about 150 yards of this compost. It was not stinky when we used it, but knowing now about compost, at one point in its life, it was stinky and it never got properly made. So we can say we put on a lot of compost, but the quality of it is, you know, is definitely not what I would call a compost. And we'll go in later on to explain more what a compost is. But modern day terms, that's what it was. So that was the first year. Year two, we applied a locally made compost. That was really good compost. The guy did a really nice job monitoring the heat, everything that went in it, making sure you had lots of water. That person had gone and taken a soil biology course before he started making compost, and he made really, really beautiful compost the first couple of years. So when we used his compost, great compost, but the problem we did is we tilled it into the soil, like you see this picture. This picture is what I would say is the problem with this incorporating the compost into the soil. Is you have compost at the top, which is beautiful. That other stuff is feather meal. So that was our the lighter stuff, the light brown stuff. That's feather meal. So it's for nitrogen. And so we put compost down and the feather meal, and then we would work in it. And that later on we realized was the problem we had. So we applied really great compost, but we then turned it in and caused problems and basically just obliterated all the little critters in there. Year three, we applied the same compost from that guy, but he had started working, and we had really good yields our first couple of years, like wonderful yields, hardly any crop failures other than our mismanagement, but not crop failures due to lack of nutrients or lack of anything to do with the soil, because we had put a lot of organic matter in that first year. And I think that first year of those 150 yards of compost kept us going for a few years until we just ran the well dry. And then year two, because we applied that really good compost, that helped us along. But then we started, like later on, we started getting worse and worse results. Year three, our yields definitely started to decrease, and we were wondering how we ever made the yields in year one and year two. And that was, we got compost that was quite woody. So when you take a wood and you incorporate into the soil, it needs a nitrogen to break down the wood, the carbon, the high carbon, before it gives you that nitrogen back. So we didn't know that at that time. We just followed what we thought we knew or was best. And so we incorporated the compost into the beds, and ended up having yield losses, even though we thought we should have gotten better yields year after year, or at least on par. Year four, we switched to, went and got some chicken manure from Armstrong, chicken manure and wood shavings. Composted chicken manure. They definitely composted up to the heat because it was OMRI listed. Organic guys were using it as well, and I heard about it from organic guys up in the Armstrong area, and they were having decent results, but not super awesome results. So same thing, we brought it 4 pails per 50-foot bed, same ratio as we had done previous years. Again, tilled it into the soil and looked and see what was that all about. And again, our yields went down. Then the following year, we applied a peat from Greenrod, which some of you are familiar with, maybe. What's it called? Black Diamond. Black Diamond peat. It's an awesome product. It is a peat, but I wouldn't call it a compost. Nor would I now call any of the other materials that we had used in previous years composts. And we'll get into why I say that. I will call them a soil amendment. I'll call them organic matter, but they're not compost. So we applied the same peat product again with unimpressive results. So we didn't have any awesome results once we hit past year 2 and year 3. Our yields went down. We started having more pest problems. We started seeing our soil profile was not great. We were losing it. It was turning more powdery. It was just being, well, if we flip the bed 8 times a year, that is the rototiller going through that bed at least 8 times. And some of the beds I would rototill twice to get that beautiful look, that common, oh, let's get it perfect, fluffy, and then we plant into it. So we obliterated the entire soil food structure up to 8 times per bed. So looking back now, it makes complete sense why nothing worked, or why nothing worked perfectly. So year 6, we also did soil tests, and because we had now seen 3 years of continuous degrading of our yields and seeing, having pest problems, having more flea beetle damage, it started attacking different stuff. And so we did soil tests, and it came back that our pH was a 7.9, which my guess is it was at 7.9 the whole time. So it was high. So went and talked to agronomists or the fertilizer people, and they're like, well, if you apply sulfur, that'll bring the pH back closer to 7. It'll bring it down, and then you'll have better nutrient uptake. So, okay, well, we did some looking into it, and sulfur also wipes out fungi, good and bad. And most soils are already very low in fungi. So by wiping that out even more, one does a lot of damage by doing that. But we didn't know that fully at that time as to the full consequences of that. So we did apply the sulfur. And can't really say anything great came from it. We just went along with a program. And then after that year, talking to fertilizer people, they were like, oh, well, so now you have to add magnesium and phosphorus and all these things, because once you start down the road of adding individual minerals, or individual minerals, well, then one has to keep going down that road. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, and it just did not sit well with us. We did not, we were ready to throw in the towel, because it didn't make sense to have to kill something in soil in order to gain something. And for us, year 6 was kind of the bottom of the, like, we were ready to just stop farming. It was just, we were not making money. Well, we were scrounging together probably around $40,000 combined income between the two of us in year 6, which was the lowest part of where we were. And at that time, if our previous presentation, year 7, we took on the next field because we thought, well, maybe we need more land. Maybe we just need to do other things. So we tried to tackle problems. I did most of the trying to do the next thing. Brenda was trying to get us to see something else, but we were I was thinking that grow bigger, and then maybe we can not flip the bed so often, and then maybe we will have better results. But in our last presentation, we showed that that field was not a good choice, and we dropped that after a year, really. So discovering the soil food web. One late day in 6th year farming, while packing produce, a webinar with Dr. Lan Ingham was on a, what was it, on a podcast that you were listening to?
Yeah, it was just something that a friend had shared on Facebook, I think, and it sounded interesting, so I bookmarked it, that I wanted to listen to it. And yeah, so it was just audio.
Right.
Yeah.
So if nobody is familiar with Elaine Ingham, she is she's here to save the planet through soil. She's amazing. She's done a lot of work helping to get a lot of people to understand soil, farmers, agronomists, to just people that have now found a passion and are now trained in soil food web systems. Her courses and just her way of looking at soil. So after hearing about her and listening to some of the things she had to say, we finally went and took that winter. We took the course, her soil food webs foundation course, where we learned about the morphology of the of biology, learned how to run a microscope, looking how to make proper compost, doing liquid inoculums. So we really got to look and see what approach one must take if one is to do full regenerative agriculture and letting the soil do its nutrient cycling. So we purchased a microscope and started looking at soils. So we looked at our soil compost with worm, any compost we could get our hands on, any worm casting, anything, to see what the different profiles were. And going back to what her definition of compost, her definition of compost is a biologically rich material. So if one buys a so-called compost and it's not biologically rich, so biologically diversity, low in biological mass, then it can't really be called a compost. Then it's more of a soil. It's more of an organic matter. And soils, so how I deem a lot of composts are closer to soils, and a lot of soils are closer to dirt, because dirt is void of biology. Soil has biology in it. Compost is abundant with soil biology. So we have all these words mixed up. Just from my reference point, that's what I'll be talking about. When I say compost, I mean like a proper compost that has lots of volume of critters, so mass, and lots of diversity, all the different stages of the soil food web. So having taken that course, it renewed our faith in nature. Elaine Ingham talks about how there isn't a soil on this planet that doesn't have the minerals necessary to grow healthy plants. That's a big statement. That's, for some people, they probably won't believe this, but her thing is nutrient cycling with the microbiology in the soil is what makes these minerals bioavailable to the plant. So it's the soil biology that dissects the sands, silts, and the clays into little minerals that are water soluble so that the plant can take it up through its roots. And in return, the plant takes sunlight, which is carbon, which is cakes and cookies, and they exude that down through root exudates, and that's how they feed the biology. So there is a symbiotic relationship between a plant and the biology in the soil. It's a give and take. And so that's what nutrient cycling, that's what she calls nutrient cycling. So minerals are made available to plants through nutrient cycling by the soil food web. Making compost is an active process that requires proper, so now talking about compost, if the soil is void of or is low in diversity of biology and volume of biology, which are your workers. So I call the microbiology as in the workforce. So if you don't have a workforce chipping away at those sand, silts, and clays, then there isn't enough nutrients, enough minerals in the soil to feed the plant. So how you can make or bring your biology, your little critters into your soil is through compost. Because your compost, you can make, well, proper compost has exuberant amounts of biological mass and diversity in it. So it has way more than it actually needs for any plant to grow in it. So you can take compost and inoculate a soil in order to bring up the volume and to bring up the diversity. And then when there is enough of them around, they can start doing their nutrient cycling in the soil. Now, these little critters need organic matter in order to have housing, to string organic matter together with their little glues that they exude. And then fungi will later on take those micro aggregates and make them into larger aggregates by binding them together with its string. You know, if you look at, well, fungi is long strings. And so that becomes housing for the little critters so that the big critters don't come and eat them all up at the same in one go. So, you know, earthworm is a carnivore. An earthworm will eat all those other little critters that we don't see, but in a microscope, you can see them abundantly. So you need the smallest bacteria. You need the fungi, the protozoa, the nematodes. All those little critters need to come before the earthworm. The earthworm is just a sign that there's microbiology in place. But the earthworm also eats bad guys. So you can have a soil full of earthworms and it's going to be putrid. I have seen soil that is gray and stinks and it has lots of earthworms in there. So the question was with me is like, well, must be great soil because it's got earthworms in there. But that's not the case because those earthworms were eating anaerobic biology, which is not good for your plants. So having earthworms in your soil is not necessarily saying you have good life in it. It means that there is life, but not necessarily good. The good thing about an earthworm, whatever goes through an earthworm and comes out the back end, whatever comes out the back end is aerobic. It can eat something anaerobic, but it will always poo out, which is what they call worm castings. It'll poo out aerobic stuff. So compost, making compost is an active process. To turn a soil around, one must have good compost. So we learn how to make really good compost, and it has to go through an action of, it doesn't have to heat up necessarily, but it needs to go through phases. I'll just call them phases. I'm not going to go too deep into it. There's much better material on compost. But it needs to go through phases so that when it is done, it has taken all the plant matter and allowed first the bacteria to breed. And then once the pile has gotten to a nicer condition, then the fungi start to spread out. And then you start bringing in the protozoa, the nematodes, those are all start coming and they start breeding in larger numbers. And then finally the earthworm will come in as well. And then so then you have the entire plethora of the soil food web. So there is enough good biology in a handful of properly made compost to effectively benefit 1 acre of land. Think about that for a second. One handful, you know, say it's 2 pounds. 2 pounds of really good compost can inoculate and change 1 acre of land to progressively get better and better. So you don't need a lot of something that's good in order to start the process. It's, you know, it can be a bit of a train, as in like chug along and then it picks up speed. but you can do that. Elaine Ingham talks about how 4 applications, well, she's seen 1 application fix systems, but in general, I believe she says 4 applications, if you've had proper compost and you do it properly, 1 will have turned the soil around. Now, that is also speaking from grasslands and from land that is not flipped over or the crop wiped out ever. There's always live roots in place, which allows the critters to constantly do their nutrient cycle. And the problem with vegetable farmers is that we flip our beds a lot. So vegetable farmers are the hardest on any land of any farming type that there is, right? So it's constantly replanting, taking it out, replanting, taking it out year after year after year. So to turn a vegetable farm around to regenerative agriculture takes a lot more, as we'll talk about later on. Is a lot harder than just saying that we're going to apply 1 compost extract on this land once and our problems are solved, because we thought that we might get off that lucky, but it ended up not working out that well. So the answers to many of our current problems in both human and soil health can be solved with plants grown in biologically rich soil. That's now been tested through, like the human biome, the gut biome now has been shown to be very similar in makeup in biological life as to soil, good soil is. Healthy plants grown in healthy soil leads to healthy animals and healthy humans. I'm not going to go into much more in this, but in New Zealand, Elaine Ingham solved a flesh-eating disease that cows were, their tongues were, what were they? Their tongues were being flesh eaten and they couldn't eat the grasses anymore because they were so imbalanced with the chemicals and fertilizers that they put on, that they turned that around with 2 applications of a compost tea. In 3 months, they've solved that flesh-eating cow kind of disease that they had in there. So,
can I just say, so the biggest takeaway from that was they thought that these cows had a disease, and what she proved through her work was it was just that they weren't accessing the nutrients that they needed, because once she turned that around, you know, the supposed disease went away. So it was a nutrient deficiency, you know, not a disease.
Okay, applying the soil food web to our market garden. When we tested our soil for biology, we were not surprised to find that it was high in bacteria and very low mass, so low volume, had virtually no fungi, and I'm guessing that anybody who tills their land will find the same results, and very few secondary consumers. So the secondary consumers would be the bigger ones, the protozoa, the nematodes, and then also into earthworms. So we've seen very few earthworms our first couple of years. And then as we started applying this stuff, we started seeing earthworms. So we searched for biologically active compost or worm castings throughout BC. We bought whatever we could get our hands on in samples to sample them. So I would drive wherever I had to go take a sample from someone's compost pile, bring it home, analyze it, and find out if we wanted to buy it or not. And we found, so now the definition of compost again, at that time, we now knew what compost needed to be like, because we had numbers, we had quantifiable numbers through our microscope course, that we could look at a soil and say, okay, there is this much volume of critters on our slide, so we could quantify and say there is that much in the soil. And so we didn't find anything that was worth putting on, including the composts from Armstrong, from Kelowna, from wherever. So we started looking at all of those as organic matter, just straight up organic matter. Don't count it more than that. So the Glengrow stuff, I know some farmers buy it from Kelowna. They call it a compost, but I call it an organic matter. It's great for bringing up organic matter, and it's great for deep mulching, but it's not a compost. And we tried to take those products and enhance them to try and maybe add some, like recompost them. That worked out pretty good. So using them as a carbon source and then adding more green to them and making a proper compost pile, turning it, and we had decent success, but I wouldn't say a lot. So we started making our compost using Soil Foods Web's principles, but found that it was very hard to keep making compost while trying to juggle the farm, because it was the compost that Elaine Ingham talks about has to be turned. If you look at the proper way to make compost, anything that is sellable as certified compost has to be turned, I think, up to 5 times, and has to have reached temperatures 5 times. So that's a lot of turning, and that in the process that hurts the biology as well, as we'll see later on. So the other thing that was missing in the soil food web, so we now knew how soil needed to be, how it should function, how we could actually improve a soil, but we were missing the information how to put it into the context of a market garden, high intensity flipping beds. And, you know, because we were not going to stop vegetable farming. We were not going to go grow hay and say, okay, well, we solved our soil problems and now we're going to grow hay. We still were trying to do vegetables and get our yields back. So we went down the path of trying to make compost in a couple different ways, and we ended up with the Johnson-Su reactor. If you're not familiar with it, write this down right now. Go look for Johnson-Su bioreactor. This is a wonderful compost pile that never needs to be turned. It was invented by Dr. Johnson, who has also studied soil biology, is on par with Elaine Ingham as far as the understanding of soil biology goes. And he used to make his own compost by constantly turning it as well. And then finally one day his wife is like, why do you keep turning compost? Why not just make something that you don't have to turn? So one of the reasons you must turn compost is when it gets too hot, if it gets past 65 degrees Celsius, it'll start to produce anaerobic critters, anaerobic producing critters.
Turns anaerobic.
And so that's when it turns anaerobic. That's when it starts smelling. So what you smell is the gaseous minerals, the minerals that have turned into a gas through the anaerobic process, which are now not usable by the plant. So you're actually smelling minerals going up in the air. So the Johnson-Su reactor is designed that it never ever goes past its heat threshold, and you never have to turn it. So it has, I'm not going to go too much into this because I still have a bit to go here. So anyway, you can Google that and find out how a Johnson-Su reactor works. A Johnson-Su reactor makes beautiful compost, makes biologically rich compost it definitely takes a bit longer than a quick compost pile, because you can make compost in like 20 days if you're very good, like ready for putting out into the field. And 45 days, you can make a compost that's high in fungi. This process, he lets his get upwards of 18 months, but what he's getting out of it is amazing. Do yourself a favor and look into this person. They are fixing farmlands, large tracts of commercial farmlands in the States with awesome results using his compost that they make with this bioreactor. So our first Johnson-Su was made with shredded leaves and a small amount of grass clippings mixed in with leaves that, so the leaves were the carbon, and then the grass clippings were the green. And so we just made ours never got super warm because we erred on the caution of being a cooler mix than a hotter mix, because we just wanted to make sure, and it turned into beautiful, beautiful soil. In fact, this last picture from the last slide was from this Johnson C reactor. Sorry, I can't go back, or else I'd go back. So applying the biology. Of the 3 different ways to apply a rich compost to our farm is either compost itself, a tea, or an extract. A compost you need a lot more of because it's how do you spread it out evenly on a bed? A tea is brewed where you bubble compost, so you extract the water soluble critters. Well, they're all water soluble. They suspend in water. You give it some food, and then you bubble it for up to, I've heard people do it for like 2 days, and then you multiply your critters, some faster than others, because the reason that being is like bacteria multiplies every 20 minutes, and fungi, I think that's right, 20 minutes. And then fungi, I think, multiplies every 40 minutes. So in a brewer, you would get faster bacterial production than you will fungi, because they're double the rate of reproduction. So we chose to go with, what is an extract? An extract is taking compost, using a fine mesh, the same mesh as one would use in a compost tea brewer, but we would just rinse that or massage it in a 5-gallon pail to extract the life out of it, and then we would put it into that big blue drum that you see there, and we would add water to it. Then we would also add I think we would add a little bit of food for them in the field, because as long as you put it out within, say for instance, an hour, you're not going to switch to anaerobic. So we didn't have to worry about it going anaerobic on us. And then we also added biologically compatible fertilizers to the mix. And then we did what we called a soil drench. So we would take, there's a worker taking a jug, which will have the mixture that's in the barrel, and adding however many liters it was that our ratio was into that watering jug can. Then she has a water there, which she filled up, topped up with water, straight water itself. And then one of those jugs inoculated 2 50-foot beds. So we did that soil drenching after every transplant or after every direct seeding, and with longer term crops, especially heavy feeders, every month we did that. And that worked out quite well. I mean, we definitely seen some results. What was that other thing I was going to say about this one? Yeah, we seen good results, but I'll talk about more about what I was going to say later. So from low till to no till farming. So the challenge with our soil when we first started trying to go no-till was that the soil was really hard to plant into because it didn't have good structure from years of rototilling and lack of biology. It hard panned. It had a hard pan at the surface, and then it also had a hard pan below where at the bottom of the rototiller stroke. So rototiller on its downstroke actually compacts the soil underneath it, even though the top part is very fluffy. So we had 2 compaction zones. We switched in the spring. Then we went from we broad forked our entire field. So 320 beds, 2 broad forks, took roughly around 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And we would do, I think people could do about 3 hours per day before they were wore out, and we'd do something else. And so that's what we started doing every year from I think when we really adapted this was about year 8 on.
Yeah.
So we did it for the last, no, we did it for 4 years. So it would have been latter part of year 7 is when we started doing it. Yeah. For a couple of years, we would use the little tilter, which is a Johnny's 18-inch rototiller style tilter. It doesn't have a lot of power in it, so it does less damage to the soil than a tiller does, but it still does damage. It still inverts all the crops. It took a few years for our soil to improve with the application of compost extracts and the addition of Glen Grow compost, but it's not a compost, it's a soil amendment. I'll call it organic matter. And we would apply that on our beds in the fall, right? So we still didn't fully adapt we still would till the compost in till pretty much the last year, and which is the hardest lesson I think I learned mostly was that even though we added the biology and we had a couple of years of doing good stuff with it, when we came to the compost, we were still digging it in, even though we were trying to shallow dig it in, because the thinking was that take the compost, put it into your soil in the first couple inches, and increase your organic matter in your first couple inches of your soil so that your soil actually improves. But that causes problems because now you disrupt the entire structure of that soil that this biology had to create in the whole year. And then here one goes through with a rototiller and causes mayhem. So what we found out later years, and what is the current trend right now, is deep mulch, is still bringing organic matter, still allowing the critters to live in that organic matter, still creating a weed barrier. Well, actually creating a weed barrier, whereas when you till it in, you don't have a weed barrier. And now the soil food web system can work a lot better. So we found that the most effective way to turn over beds was to wet our beds and use either a clear plastic, so clear plastic in the summertime when there was a lot of sunshine, or a black silage tarp when it was not so hot, or you can use it when it's hot as well. And we would flail mow the beds or straight onto like a first cutting of salad greens, keep it on there so we would wipe out the crop, whatever that is. Either we harvest it or we flailed it, then we would water it. Then we would put a tarp over top of it, let that degrade for about 5-6 days, uncover it again. If we needed to, we would water it again as well, because we noticed water and having moisture there really broke it down a lot quicker. Drier soils just never went anywhere. They just kind of dried everything up and nothing really degraded. It just dried, you know. And
we were concerned about the soil biology, right? Like
yes.
That was the concern of doing a solarization with clear plastic. So that's why we experimented with it being moist, so that you would have, you know, the debris, you know, is gone, but it's not just dried up and looking like an arid desert when you uncover it. So
yeah,
that was the thinking there.
Yes. Okay, so here, next one. So lessons we've learned with all of this, and just to recap of so the most compacting effect on soil comes from rain falling or water, sprinklers, falling on bare land. So the reason why deep mulch works so well, so deep mulch, by the way, if people aren't familiar with it, deep mulch system is adding, the theory goes that you add 3 inches of a organic matter, a compost, but I'll call it organic matter. So Glenmore Grow from Kelowna. Add it to your top of your bed. Do not work it in. And then that 3 inches is where life can live, and then they can go into the soil and come up, and as the worms go through that organic matter, they pull that organic matter down into the soil. So that's the theory behind it. And we did not use that theory till our last year, and I can now see why people have such great successes with deep mulching. So combining a deep mulch system with inoculums, making a really good compost or buying a really good compost, and then inoculating your fields, and then get the process going. So the minerals that a plant needs come directly from the work of the soil food web. You can add minerals to a soil and maybe retrieve less than, I mean, the saying goes that you gain back less than 1% of everything you put on your soil. Everything else just kind of either off gases, disappears, stays put, or gets bound up. So even when you add a fertilizer, your plants still only take up about 1% of that entire thing. Rototilling soil is equal to a hurricane destroying everything in its path. So when you rototill, you destroy all that soil structure. Now, again, why is soil structure so important? Soil structure is there because the biology has made glues that has bound together little bits of sand, silt, and clay, and then fungi comes along and binds all those microaggregates together into a bigger aggregate. And now you have water retention, you have air gaps, you have housing, and you have food, because fungi actually eats also what it produces. Fungi eats humic and it produces humic. So it does this is kind of weird, kind of cool. So a rototiller, every time you run a rototiller through, you literally are wiping out, you're breaking all those, well, you're not breaking all the houses, but you're breaking most of the housing. And now you have critters that don't have a house anymore. They're easier to be found by the bigger predators, and they don't reproduce as fast because they used to live together in a house and now they don't. So the other thing is, top mulch does not have to be great compost. In fact, it doesn't have to be compost. It has to be an organic matter. It needs to be organic matter. So you can't really put sand on top and call it mulch. You can't really put clay on top. You can take any organic matter and it'll be deemed mulch. Now, a broken down organic matter seems to work the best. That's why what they call composts work so well, because they're already broken down. So they're much easier to now for that biology to pull down into the ground and to use as its homes, as a building material, and for their homes. So organic matter in soils is housing and food for biology. Add good biology and keep your native soil covered is really what it takes to make all of this work, right? So lands are depleted in biology as in volume and in mass. You take a good compost, you inoculate and bring in breeding, they're going to breed. So you bring in your workers, you set up housing for them, which is through organic matter by deep mulching, put it on top there. If you have a soil high in organic matter, you're going to have quick turnover as well. But if your soil is less than 5% in organic matter, it has a hard time getting going without having active roots in there all the time, by having plants in the soil all the time. So I'm talking from a farmer's market garden by putting in a 3-inch deep mulching system. which then, so with all of that together, you end up building soil very fast. So you keep your soil covered. You can't keep soil covered 100% of the time as a vegetable farmer. So you're using deep mulch to do that. You're using a thick layer of deep mulch to be a weed suppressant, so you don't have to go and disturb the soil and break up and cause mayhem in the houses of these critters. And you don't have to destroy the soil structure, because your soil is also always going to be nice and loose because you haven't gone and tilled it the last time around. So that is it for this. We can take questions later on, but now I'm going to go to, I think we're going to go to the spreadsheet part of it. Right, Danny?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Yes, I'll go here now. So share screen. I'm going to go desktop. Oh, here. Where is, now I'm going to go here. Spreadsheets. All right. Hello? Oops, I don't think
we can't see a screen yet.
Yeah, I just noticed that. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Can you see a spreadsheet?
Yep.
You can see my mouse highlighting.
Yeah, you're on K12 right now.
Great, excellent. Okay, that's what I wanted to do. Okay, so planning tools. Spreadsheets. That's all I can really say is spreadsheets. We planned out our farm every year by going back to the previous years. So I'm going to go to the labor one in here. Going back to previous years and looking at each month and the total volume of hours. So if you see 2019 is here, this next one is January. All these months is the hours that we worked in our field. Those hours are not 100% true. I modified them to simply give an example, by the way. So we would look at 2019. Those were the hours that were worked then. Then 2020, the hours that were worked there. And then 2021, that was our last year's. That's how we would go about and plan it. So in 2019, there's 6,385 hours up here, 6,000 in 2020. And then our goal by doing this projection would be to decrease our hours again. So we know exactly how many hours people had worked in previous years. And so we knew each month what hours we would need. And so we would just simply plan out the hours that we would need each month here. And then we would divide them into each person, right? So it's if you don't track your hours and you don't know the exact number of hours your farm took to produce its production, then you can't do this. One must have everyone's hours from the previous year in order to plan it this year. So if you don't do this, I would say to you, first of all, make sure you track your hours and then get to this stage. So this would be stage one. We would plan out our hours. And then, so down in here, we knew that my hours here, 200 hours, my rate was $30 an hour. This would be the total income that I would make for the year. So we knew each one what it was. Brenda, she was expected to work 1,350. Employee AB would be 1,100 hours, employee BC 1,225, on and on and on. And all these hours ended up being 5,765. And our total, this projection here, our total price that we would pay for this year would be 147,000 in labor costs. So we knew that was our labor costs. We would know that was 2,560 would be our average hourly rate. And this is how many hours we worked. So that would be step number one, was labor hours. The next one, we would go and project everything out that we wanted to do. So we say, for instance, we wanted to do our wholesale. We wanted to do $50,000 and $50,000 in sales. in our farmers market, wanted to do 50,000, grocery 12,000, veggie box 50,000 for $162,000 in sales. So we knew that that was our total sales that we wanted to do. Now we went and we projected all of our costs, you know, put everything down, seeds, border fees, potting soil, all that sort of stuff, anything, shop rent, like everything in here. And then at the end, you come here that total expenses for this projection here was $49,950, and then total payroll was $110,000. Total expenses with everything was $1,955. Net income was $2,050, because up here our total income was $162, and our total expenses was $159.95. So we started off the season at least knowing and projecting where we would be. Now, the next stuff we would do is we'd have this sidebar in here. So 6301. Notice here that this number 6301 coincides with 6301 in here. So now these seeds in here, as we would buy seeds, say for instance, we'd have a Johnny orders for $300. That $300 here, here's our budget. Our budget was $8,000. It now said that we had $7,700 left over. We had spent $300, and that's how we kept track of all of our expenses through here, right? So if I go in here, say for instance, natural gas for our greenhouse, if I ordered a load of natural gas for in March 22, $1,500, it went in here, it automatically tabulated in here, and here it said, oh, I've already overspent $500. So now I already know, like here, sorry, I'm going too fast. So where I'm highlighted, said I'm $500. So that's the gist of this program, tracking your hours. Now, what we would do is these numbers here, they would all be recorded in this spreadsheet. Who is the merchant? What is the code, the date, the total GST, PST amount, etc. So at the end of the year, you can pull all your GSTs, PSTs out and that sort of stuff. So we kept track of the receipts on this page by putting them all down in here. These receipts corresponded to these columns in here. And then I'll show you later on how that corresponded with something else. So we kept track of our receipts on a daily, like as they came in. We had a projection of what we were going to spend, and now on sales. So now we knew what, so here, sales, this is now our sales category. So on our previous, I'll just go back here. Notice here how our sales were these numbers in here. So 50,000, 50,000, 1250. In our sales category, as we would have sales here, say, for instance, we sold something in February 24, March 1st, a wholesale that was $600 there. That same week, we did $435 of market, farmers market, retail, $678, whatever, farm sales, doesn't really matter. And then trade. Keep track of what you take from your farm as well, because it's work that you had to do. So put a value to it. Charge it or register it out the same way as if you would have sold it, and put it down. So if we got a veggie box valued at $45, this would go in here. So all of our staff got $1 per hour food as payment for working. So in here trade, we would say maybe $125 in trade per week. On top of your week. So now every week we would fill this in, and every week these numbers on the side here would start to accumulate, right? So we knew at any given week what we did that week, where we stood in our gross sales, and how the weeks compared to previous weeks, right? So far we now know our, we projected our labor, we projected our expenses, and now we're starting to do our sales as we come along. So the way that we were able to keep track of our sales from year to year was in the sales category over here, which was a direct relation from year 2020 to year 21. This is blank because I didn't want to put numbers on it. So we would, every week, we would fill out, oh, sorry, you're missing this part over here. Here, February 1st. So every week from 2020, I would have this number in here, how many hours we would work that week. And then we would have it in 2021. So we would know how close we were in reference to the previous year, because we always based our season on the previous year. So we kept referencing every category. So we were tracking hours here from year to year. So we were tracking accumulative hours and weekly hours. We were tracking our dollars and like accumulative, and then dollars in hours per week. We were tracking sales weekly, sales accumulative as they accumulated, and then trades. So that's how we referenced from year to year as far as what we were, where we were at with the previous year. Now going back to hours. So hours in here. So this column in here, A, already had all those hours that we forecasted under labor forecast, right? So under labor forecast here, we already did this. We transferred these hours here. Sorry, they don't line up 100%, but that's what I would have done, is these hours in here were transferred over to this column. And now we knew each month that, you know, as we filled in these months in here, so say for instance, in February, I worked 43 hours. Brenda did 32, on and on and on. So over here, if that were the case, we already knew that we were 75 hours versus projected or versus forecast of 40. So if you're over, you already know where you're at compared to to one's forecast. So our hours we would work would go in here. So let's say February 4th, I would work 6 hours. The next day I would work 7. The next day I would work 8. They would all be recorded in here. And then this number, you can see this 43 number went up in here. And then that, you'd have to make this work to go show up under each month in here. So this page here was all the hours that were recorded, and it tracked the hours compared to our forecast, where we were with our forecast.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I just think it's important that people understand that one of the things that was mentioned in last week's presentation was to hire when you need to hire, hiring at the right time. That was one of our big lessons, was to hire when we didn't think we could afford it. So by doing this and keeping really good track of things like labor hours, we were able to know ahead of time, you know, that we would need, you know, to have a certain amount of money at the beginning of the year, just to be really realistic with what our expectations were.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So then I will go into here. So this spreadsheet now is the dollar amount, or sorry, this is hours per week that we would enter in here. And it would, say for instance, I did there. It automatically calculates and puts it into this total category, and then a running accumulative in here. And it creates my running total over here and creates a weekly category over here. So we had our hours worked. We had a sheet where we would enter our hours per day. This would be a weekly sheet of the hours being transferred into a weekly total hours worked and weekly dollar amount that were worked. Now, all of that comes into one grand spreadsheet, which is, as we entered the data from the sales spreadsheet, it tabulated into this B column. So every week, as you notice here. Oh, sorry, I will highlight that and go 11 or 12. 12, there it is, much better. In fact, I'll do the whole thing. 12, there it is. So in our sales category, every week, right here, every week, we would enter these numbers into them. Actually, they would be tabulated automatically. So this number came from the sales spreadsheet. This one came from the sales spreadsheet. This number came from the labor spreadsheet. This number came from expenses spreadsheet. And then here, this column, we knew our profit. There's really no profit. I don't know how to word it, but that's where it was. And then on this last column, that column ended up being where we knew how much percentage of our total expenses, or sorry, of our income was paid in labor. And our labor costs were over 75% of our total income. Including everybody, including our wage. So last week I was saying that we did not pay ourselves as much as we thought we deserved. So we weren't profitable, but we paid ourselves a better wage than we did in our couple of years. And so if one doesn't track the hours, then you'll never know what you're paying yourself compared to your income. And this was on a weekly basis. So we knew where we stood on a weekly basis. If our sales were down or we were under by, I don't know, just one number, $10,000 by June 21st, and we were high in labor costs, so at least we seen where we were so we could still make corrections. But if one flies in the dark and doesn't know nothing, then you can't correct until you do your entire books. So my whole thing with everything in farming is, why I learned this saying is like, stop and correct. Once we tracked everything, so like down here, our spreadsheets, we have a sales spreadsheet where we enter the sales numbers in here. And by the way, those sales came from local line. So we were able to pull those numbers from local line because that was our sales platform. And we put all of our sales information into it. So we got up to date, up to the minute information from there. We had our code spreadsheet, which was all of our expenses and our projections of where we were going to spend. So we could tell if we were over budget on certain categories or not. We had receipts, which could back up the expenses. So if there was, if we had to trouble check and to even give it to your accountant, it's super easy for them to now see what you did. We had a year to date that showed our sales, our labor costs on a weekly basis. So it told us an overall view on a weekly basis. We had our staff spreadsheet here, which is our weekly sums of hours worked and dollars per dollar amounts that were worked. And by the way, all these calculations already have WCB, CPP, all that stuff included. So, you have to put those numbers in so you know what you're up against. And then a spreadsheet here where we track the individual hours per day. We had our labor forecast, which is what we started the season with. And then, we had a tab in here which was just payroll. That was just for me to keep track of who how much hours have I paid out and how much money I still owed. And then last, we had a spreadsheet that directly week to week was a reference to the previous year. So I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot of information because for some of you who are not really interested in this, it'll be too much. Gladly will field more questions on this.
Are you going to mention Tim?
Yes, and then the other tool we were using for our planting is tend.com, TEND.com, and for the last 2 years, it is a planting and a farm tool which I think most people now use. if you grow more than, gosh, I want to say 5 or 6 crops and you produce more than $50,000-$60,000 worth of produce per year, you should get it because it'll save you money. So, or something equivalent. If there's something equivalent out there, then go for it. But I don't know of anything equivalent to it. And it's a wonderful program. I'm not going to say more than that. My tracking system was the other one. That is someone else's, and you can easily sign up for them and go online. Okay.
That was awesome, John. That was a lot of information there in a short period of time, but it was really interesting to continue hearing just a bit more of the history of your previous farm, all of your knowledge and experience and expertise with the compost and mulch. And as someone for myself that doesn't run a business, it's pretty wild seeing all of those spreadsheets too. But really impressive that you worked all that out and managed to really learn so much about running your farm as a business. So thank you so much. I did want to open the floor to any questions. If anyone has anything, feel free to type it in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask away.
Hi, Greg.
Hey, John. Great information. Thanks a lot. Were you guys tracking what you couldn't sell? So product that was ready for sale, but you couldn't monetize?
We actually never really had any crops we couldn't sell. We very early on, the first couple of years, we dialed it right away how much we had to grow of each type. And we literally hardly ever threw anything away. I think my spreadsheet on 1 year, I tabulated all the wastage we had, and the total wastage came to less than $10,000. That is stuff that went rotten, stuff that made it off the field and into the cooler. Sometimes there's stuff in a bed that it might have snuck up on another planting, and you already harvested some of it, but the other stuff is ready. That was tilled under, and so we didn't really count that as that was just, you have to always have overlap, but we never really had issues with coolers full of produce we couldn't sell.
And I'm just going to say it's because of all the tracking that we did. Like we would record everything we brought to the farmers market and what sold, what quantity, how much didn't sell. So it just made it so easy from week to week and year to year. We started using local line. So I would put the farmers market information into the local line system because it wasn't done automatically. And so then the next week I'd go through the list and one of my employees would just write down because then we just knew what to expect to sell. It just made it so much easier. So we're not hauling a whole bunch of stuff back that we can't sell. It was really
I will say one thing which never got mentioned as well is we've done this from day one, and that is every produce coming off the field was labeled, weighed, and dated to what it was, how much was in it. And then therefore we always knew or could see what we had in stock. And those numbers were saved and put into a spreadsheet so we could tell volume wise at the end of the year how much arugula we pulled off the field. And then you can then go into local line to say we sold X amount of arugula. So we actually could tell our wastage there, even though we also had a spreadsheet where we wrote down all our wastage. So we had multiple ways to loop for information to loop back on itself to make sure that we built redundancy into our tracking so that we were not missing anything. And it might seem a bit over the top, but that $10 that you waste is coming out of your pocket because you as the farmer are already underpaying yourself.
And maybe this isn't the right forum for that. How did you guys determine your pricing, your retail pricing?
So
Good question.
very good question, actually. We started off following other farmers, and then we adjusted it based on what it actually took to grow it, produce it, and go from there. So at first we would just follow everybody else and be like, a bunch of carrots was $3, it was this big, and all that sort of stuff. But then peas is a great example. We started selling snap peas for $3 a pound. We made it up to $6 a pound because it just wasn't worth it less than that. So we progressively charged more, and then we would only market them to the people that really wanted them. We wouldn't bother trying to sell them or grow volumes of them in order to try and sell more than what we knew we could get for them, because we had already jacked up the prices. So we knew restaurants wanted them. So we just tell them, it's like, hey, peas are hard to grow. The price is going up to this price, and that's what it is. Are you still interested? Yes, we are. Great. Okay, we'll keep growing them. How much are you think you're going to have? Estimation, this is what we'll have them. This is the time period we'll have them. And then we would allow just a few of them to kind of bookmark them and say, well, we'll take them for sure. If not, they went to the farmer's market. And then towards the end, we just knew what we could expect from. So our pricing later on was determined by us from reference point from one crop to another, how much it costs to produce from our base point wages. But now if I were to want to go up to a trading wage, which is what I was talking last week, I would now go and analyze the entire farm prices. And I would say that, okay, we need to make X amount more money to pay everybody X amount more so that we're into a trade wage. And I would blanket everything up percentage-wise the same, because we already know that it costs, we've already dialed our labor to production ratio there. So now we had to get our labor pricing up, which meant that the entire produce had to come up. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, both of you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Anybody else? Nobody? No questions?
Hey, has with the Sioux reactor composter, like that was one of the things I watched. How much were you applying of that compost, or whatever you want to call it?
So when we were applying it, we were trying to apply about an ice cream pail per bed as a compost, because we trialed that. So again, our beds are 50 feet by 30 inches. But what we found is it is way more efficient. You get more volume out of your compost by running an extract. So we would then take, every week, we would take 25 pounds of compost and in a big bag, and wash that all into a 5-gallon pail. And that's how much we would apply for that week. So we would use about 25 pounds of compost per week for whatever was inoculated. And we would do it all on one day. So anything that was due, that came around every, how we were saying that everything newly planted was being inoculated or soil drenched every time, like every week that we planted something. And then longer heavy feeders were inoculated a month after as well. So we would put them all into the same slot.
Right. So you're using the compost from the bioreactor to make that compost tea.
Extract.
Yeah.
Not a tea, extract. Yes, yes. Very, very careful with that. Yeah.
It's kind of, you'd think it's a tea because it's just, you're just steeping it, right? Like you'd think, oh, that's what a tea is, but a tea is brewed and an extract is not brewed.
And so, you need no equipment to do an extract. Like you literally in the hands and a bag.
Right.
And a watering jug.
Yeah.
And so and then with the Johnson reactor, you weren't, like, because you're flail mowing most of your stuff in the field, you're just like adding organic matter. You're bringing, like you said, you had leaves and grass clippings that you're adding in the first one.
Now we added to the compost.
Yeah.
So when we made the Johnson Sioux, we started off with leaves and with green clippings. And that's how we started that Johnson Sioux. We only ever made one really good compost with that Johnson Sioux. We just we trialed a lot of stuff and things had failure, and then it got mixed together with other stuff. So when we finally dialed that Johnson Sioux, that's what we ended up with. But then it's funny because later on we found better compost on our farm, because again we
better biological activity.
better activity, where we had put wood chips from arborists that we had piled on the ground, like up to 3 feet thick, that we had put a black tarp over top, a silage tarp that had sat there for 4 years. That stuff was the most active, biologically rich soil we've ever looked at in a microscope. And so our last year, that's what we used. We didn't even have to use the Johnson Sioux because we had that in our back pocket. So you can make your own soil, but you need years ahead of time. The Johnson Sioux will allow you to start something now and at least start your inoculum right away if you can't find your rich.
And that was totally unintentional. I mean, I was just moving a bunch of stuff and moved this tarp off, and I went, wow, this looks really good. Let's look at this through the microscope. And it's not like we put wood chips down in a tarp and went, oh, we're going to make compost. It's just circumstantial.
Yeah. So our farm ended up getting wood chipped. All the outside perimeters were wood chipped with thousands of loads of wood chips over the years. So everywhere up to 4 feet deep of wood chips. And now when I go there and you dig in, the bottom is full of mycelium, full of fungi, worms, everything. So a great way to make your own soil is arborist wood chips are free. Just dump them out. Just don't leave them in a big pile. Spread them out on the ground, put water to them, and put a covering over top of them. You can use landscape fabric. You can use a tarp of some sorts. Keep them moist, and you will have the stuff you need to fix your soil in the future if you haven't fixed it by then. So you can make your soil quite simply, actually for free, because arborists will drop stuff off for free.
Yeah, it just depends on your location.
And did you have were you looking for hardwoods, or you were just kind of getting anything?
My only rule was no cedar, no walnut.
No cedar, no walnut?
Yeah, that's the only thing I told them. I said, just don't bring that. Other than that, I don't care.
Right.
So whatever they chipped down, we had pine needles. There was no, it all breaks down.
Right.
And even cedar, I'm guessing, I've heard from people break down, but we just didn't want to play with that. So we started mulching first with those wood chips in our early years to simply reduce weeding, to have
our pathways,
to keep our farm clean. But it ended up being a soil creator.
Yeah, we would joke that maybe we should just be planting in the pathways and leave the pathways actually became better, growing medium, of course, because we weren't planting into them, right? But you dig into them, and if they weren't rough with wood chips on the top, you scrape that off. Yeah.
So you would put it in your pathways in between your 30-inch beds?
No, our main pathways.
What we call the main pathways.
Yeah.
If you look at, I don't know, it's the picture, but
our 5 feet.
Our farm is, so each block was 12 beds. So that was 12 beds that were 30 inches bed space, 12 inches walkway, 30 inches bed spaces, on and on. That was a block. And then in between the blocks, there was 5 feet from end to end of walking space. And then in the middle, our main arteries, those were 8 feet wide. And so with all those, that's what we would call our main pathways.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And
because
go ahead.
Otherwise it would steal your nitrogen, right? While it broke down.
No, it actually doesn't. When it's sitting on top, that is a misnomer. That is not true. When you have carbon sitting on top of a soil, because it's not in contact with the soil, or it's not engulfed in soil, it doesn't actually steal nitrogen, and your biology will go up into your organic matter and pull it down into the ground in small increments, which then actually doesn't hurt you nitrogen wise.
Okay.
If I was to do it again, I would make our pathways, our pathways between our beds were 1 foot. And it was we're not very tall people, but it was really challenging for bigger people or taller people to work on our farm. I would have made them 1.5 feet. We just wanted to maximize the amount of growing space that we had. And I would also chip them, but you know, until we got away from using a tiller, you can't have wood chips near a tiller because you're going to be working them into the bed. So yeah, I mean, I've seen some farm setups that are pretty really nice and neat looking, and that's how you're going to decrease your labor costs. Because if you're not having to, you know, stirrup hoe your pathways and all that, I mean, that's why we spent so much money on labor. You know, if we had been able to continue farming the way that we've learned how now, I think we could have really seen a major reduction in our labor costs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Deep mulch now with soil inoculum as a soil drench, I think can save major amount. It can increase your livelihood by quite a bit, like a lot. I'm gonna say that if we were to continue farming and really adapt 100% to 3-inch mulching, because we never fully did. We tried so many different things, and we were on just when we quit, when we sold the farm, we got into it. And it's like, man, all this stuff. And now you guys get to just take over the creme de la creme. It would, our wage in of itself would have gone up, I'm guessing, by at least 15%. So that's a good increase. That's, you know.
I'm just going to clarify, we weren't just into it at the end. For years, I was looking at Richard Perkins and different people and looking at how they managed to not have bare soil. Our thing is the organic matter, compost, Glengrow, those types of things. You know, they were quite wood chippy, so we couldn't find anything that was reasonably cost. That was fine enough that you could run a seeder through, because we did so much with seeders and paper pot transplanters. So we needed to be able to, you know, kind of carve a pathway into that medium.
Yeah.
So we're experimenting now with our place, you know, as a garden. So yeah, we'll be happy to share what we find we're able to do, you know, now that we can put more attention to it.
Yeah. And what farming now needs is no-till implements. So deep mulch, no-till implements, and that will come, and it'll make farming quite a bit easier. I mean, that's what I'm now starting to work on, is because I see that's where we need to go. And oh my gosh, I can only imagine how easy life will be for farmers in the future. Yeah. It's some of us have done a lot of work for this.
And yeah, like I find that the one thing that you end up, like one of the reasons why you end up tilling is if you have a field where you're going to move into, but you're not ready to plant, but it's going to be long enough, or not long enough that you have time to get in a cover crop or something like that, then that field just like kind of stands barren and gets weedy, of course. And then that's like, that feels like where you're like wanting to disturb the soil. And
so use a tarp then. Use a silage tarp puts that all away. You just you wipe it out, and there's, I mean, guarantee underneath the silage tarp there can be some stuff that happens too, which is not the best for biology. However, tilling it and creating a hurricane versus bringing in a little bit of biology problems, I think you're still better off with the tarp than you are by tilling.
You mentioned at the start about your wireworm problem. How did that go with tarps? Because we use tarps for our greens in particular, mainly for like a stale seed bed.
Yep.
But I find we have like a wireworm problem for sure, and they really like it under the tarp.
So wireworms for us went away as we tilled.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to say you should do that. However, what wireworms will also be eaten by worms. So the best way to solve a wireworm problem is create your diversity of biology, get your biology to breed and multiply, get your worms to breed and multiply, and now they will take out the wireworm. There is no, people have taken in nematodes and added nematodes to their soil. They will take out the wireworm, but don't forget, a nematode is also a bigger critter, in the soil food web. So they will then also wipe out all your other little guys. And then if they don't have enough mass to keep producing, then you're back in that same place. So always, science and information everywhere seems to point out that the best way to solve any problem, being insect, bug ridden, anything, is through biology. Fixing the biology of your soil will solve problems.
What area are you, Chris?
We're in Revelstoke, but it was like a grass pasture before.
Where's your farm? Are you on the way down to the ferry?
No, that's terra firma. We're actually right in town, like right by the Big Eddie pub.
Okay. Oh, cool. When I'm there next, I'll come look you up.
Yeah. No, stop by anytime. We've already seen, like, I would say we've seen a decrease in wireworm since last year. And I mainly find it with like keeping weeds down and definitely not letting grass grow is like you'll like see a tuft of grass and you'll pull it up and there'll be like wireworms all over it.
So that people will do that too, is they will actually put in what they call a trap crop or a trap area. And I think flour works, where you then bury, small amounts of flour and in your beds at certain places. And then you just go check them every little bit, especially if you want to get a crop in there and you're worried about germination. Get them to all swarm to one area, and then you pull them out, and at least your other area. It's a band-aid solution, but it might help. So long term, you definitely want to fix or increase your biological activity.
But yeah, we never noticed an increase or a problem with wireworm from any of the tarping that we did. And I wish we could speak to that more specifically, but yeah, definitely never increased any bug pressure.
No.
Yeah.
No, we never had.
We never kept tarps on long term either, like for months, or like it was very short term, the shortest amount of time, to replant a crop.
But our beds would never sit. Like, so if you use 10, I think the longest one of our beds sat empty was 2 weeks. If it sat longer than that, what we would do, if we knew it would have to sit for a bit, we would actually keep the old crop residue on. So say, for instance, carrots, we would keep the fronds of the carrots on there and just not clean them up. And then use that as a mulch. Then when it came down to bed prep time, wipe it out and go from there. So of course, that was the latter years. I'm talking latter years is when we actually started to really put it into play. The first couple of years, we had tons of beds that were empty long periods of time. And, at that time, we're like, that's just how it is. Till it 4 times, get it powder, and it's great. Yeah, put a couple hurricanes through there and it'll be just fine.
Yeah, we got a power harrow this year, and you mentioned that in the last presentation, and we're really enjoying that.
Cool. Now the next goal is to eliminate that too.
Yeah.
And it's actually not that hard. We found our last year how we would prep a bed is we bought a 5-prong cultivator behind a wheel hoe, and we would go in and we would rip the top of the soil out a little bit, because like I was saying, is we did still have some hard pan that was created because our soil was still bare. So until you go to deep mulch, you'll still have to prep your bed surface. But we went through with a 4-pronger, and then we would just rake out the debris and plant directly into it. So our last year, we were not deep mulching, but yet we were also almost it's not no-till, because we were still disrupting the first little part of the soil, but we would not go deep.
But yeah, it's with a rake, not a tiller.
Yeah. So you can definitely work yourself towards that. I know it's easy grabbing a machine because the machine does a lot of work, but man, we dialed, well, I wasn't there a lot that last year, but they dialed bed prep, and it just became it became such an easy chore compared to what it was before.
Yeah, we just do it as a crew, all of us.
Yeah. Anything else?
I think that's good from us. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. How many
Thanks for
years?
coming.
Sorry, Christopher, how long have you guys been farming?
This is our third year, but the first year we leased land, and then now we're on our own property. So going into our second year on our own
Oh,
property.
sweet. So you actually can invest in your own stuff. Nice.
Yeah.
See, we farmed 11 years on someone else's land, and that's hard to justify bringing in thousands of dollars of something to build the soil. But it's a livelihood that one has to make. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's great.
It's one of our missing links, so we're definitely interested in that. We feel pretty sorted on the other stuff, so it's good.
Yeah, great. Well, if you want to, a good way to also get more deep into this is take Elaine Ingham's foundation course. She offers a good deal sometimes, and if you really want to get the in-depth of what it is and what to look for morphology, amazing course. But you don't have to. You can
There's a lot of
totally,
great information.
you
out there
can just
this
also
day and age.
buy good product and then inoculate it and trust that it's great. But again, you have to know where it comes from and how good it is. Because you cannot tell if something is good unless you look at it through a microscope. It's impossible. I've held beautiful looking soil in my hand, put it under a microscope, and it was dead. So
Did you ever buy inoculants like with protozoa or any of those?
Oh yeah, tried a lot of different stuff. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've bought everything that's to be found out there as far as inoculums, from mycelium from Paul Stamets to Mike's stuff to everything and anything that's out there. We've tried with not great success, right?
Right, just better to make it yourself.
Yeah. Well, if you can find it, if you can buy it, just my thing is just make sure that it is compost. It's not organic matter. Like, buy a good, you are better off buying 1 yard of compost for $1,000. Okay, I'll say it again. You're better off buying 1 yard of compost for $1,000 if it's a good compost than you are buying crap at $30 a yard. Right? So when you find a good compost, it's worth buying it if you don't want to make it yourself, because from there you can now inoculate your own stuff and you can multiply it. Or you like how many beds do you guys farm, Chris?
Well, we don't really do a bed system.
Okay.
Yeah, we do we do rows. We do a combo of, we do beds and rows and a bit of
okay. Then how many acres are you farming?
We're about
1.5
to 2.
Okay, so a yard of compost is enough soil for someone realistically if they inoculate stuff for like a couple years. So spending good money or lots of money, or when people say, oh, that's expensive, it's not expensive. You're going to get your money's worth 10 times out of it. So buying something that's really good and spending way more money than the cheap stuff is, the no good stuff, is going to get you further. So
I did do some research recently, and it does seem like there are a few companies out in BC now where people have maybe taken Elaine's course and have started making their own product. There's one I found called Terra Flora, Terra Flora Organics. I think they're out of Chilliwack. I don't know specific details, but you might want to contact him and ask. But he's talking. The way he explains his product, he's saying all the right things, and it's a worm casting product. I can't remember his name, but it's Terra Flora Organics.
Who's the lady south of Fernie?
Oh yeah, Sue.
The worm lady, worm farm.
Yeah, there's a lady who does again, that's done Elaine's course, worm castings. She's out of Fernie. I don't know if you know
south of Fernie.
South of Fernie. I don't know if you know who she is.
Just look her up somewhere. Worm casting. She sells worms and castings in that area, and she's been doing it for years. And I know a couple people that have used her on like her stuff even on commercial scales, and they've got high she comes well recommended. So her product is really good.
Great.
Thank
All
you.
right.
All right.
Thank
Is
you.
there any other questions, or we're a little over time, or happy to carry on if folks have any more questions?
I'm fine to keep going if someone has more questions or anything.
Hey, John, talking about, was it 10.com or 10.com?
Yeah,
And
10 TEND. Yeah, is
Okay.
the program. Is it 10.com or org? But TEND. Are you finding it? You'll find it. It's quite popular out there. It's a subscription based. I think it's $900. No, it's not. I think it's about $500 Canadian a year, and it will save you hours and hours and hours of labor.
Yeah, 10, yeah, you're correct. 10.com is,
10.com.
is showing up, yeah.
Great. Yeah. And you can have, like, it's a phone app too, so you can give access to your workers and put on, I mean, it's got so much stuff on it. You can do.
Yeah. Well,
you can play with
for
it.
our farm, because John was not working the last year, especially, everything used to be in his head. So it was a way to get it, him to put everything into a program so we could look every week and go, oh, okay, this is what we have to do. This is what we're planting. This is where the beds, which beds we need to have prepped. It was so worth it for us. But, we were a bigger operation too than, just two people.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're saying $399 US a year right
Oh,
now.
yeah.
It's a good deal for what they have.
Yeah, it really is.
We never did use the sales platform on it. You can as well. I've never heard nothing about it. I just looked at their fees, and their fees were a bit more money than we would pay for local line. So we just stuck with local line.
Thanks again.
You bet. Anybody else? I think that's all. Jesse, any questions? Nope.
Awesome. Well, that was a really good, a really great information and really good questions at the end there too. So thank you so much, John and Brenda, and everyone who attended. I'll send a follow-up email with the recording, and I've written some notes of some material that you've referenced, John. So I'll include that in the email as well to follow up with everyone.
Excellent. All right. Well,
Thank you. Have a good rest of your evening.
Have a great night, and happy farming.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That was awesome. Really
May
appreciate
the soil
it.
be with you.
Thanks.
Bye.
That was
Cheesy.
corny.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Bye.